My name is Dr. Chris McMahon, and today I'm going to give a talk with 3 parts. The first part is a brief introduction to the history of literary criticism, by which we will be able to contextualize the appearance of Karl Marx, and his theory of ideology, which is the centerpiece of this talk, where I'm going to present an introduction to the idea of ideology, with a special attention to the base superstructure model. And this idea of ideology is so very important because it is the single most powerful tool used in criticism today. Most criticism today is interested in the relationship between language and power, the relationship between literature and power, the relationship between the media and power. Post-colonial criticism is interested in the way in which literature was used to shore up the colonial powers and make colonial power look legitimate. Feminist criticism is interested in the way in which language and literature is used to shore up patriarchal power and make that power look legitimate. There's also queer theory, which is about the way in which language and literature and the media, that is to say text, is used to construct heterosexual male sexuality as the ideal and homosexual sexuality as a deviant form of an inferior kind. So all of these different forms of criticism, which are popular since the 60s and ever more popular today, all rely on the idea of ideology from Marx. So this is why I'm going to take this idea today and introduce you to it in the simplest way I can. I'm going to do this by using the idea of ideology to criticize a poem by Robert Frost called The Road Not Taken. I'm pretty sure you know this poem. It's one of the most famous poems in the world. People blog about it. People say it's their favorite poem when you ask them. It's a culturally significant text. It's not quite as culturally significant as, say, Shakespeare or Chaucer, but it's right up there with the canon. It's right up there in the canon, which is the list of important texts. So it's worth us having a look at this poem and putting the idea of ideology, like putting that idea like a pair of glasses and seeing what we can see about the poem with that pair of glasses on our face. And just to show you that that isn't the only way we can read Robert Frost, I'm also going to look at Robert Frost's poem from an existentialist point of view. So for starters, up until the 19th century, or around the late 18th century, English is not a subject in schools. It's not a subject in university. But from about the late 18th century into the 19th century, English is taught more and more in schools and universities. So there is a growing professionalization of the profession of the literary critic. So the first professional literary critics are people who are not pure literary critics. There's Coleridge, who's also a poet. There's Johnson, who also put together the first English dictionary. But generally speaking, these people did not take a scientific approach. Their thinking about literature was based on largely Aristotle and also medieval ideas about literature, often based on thinking about Christian ideas like the Garden of Eden and the role that art can play in trying to reverse the effects of the so-called fall. It's only in the 19th century, at the height of the Industrial Revolution, when schooling becomes a significant way in which the society like England, English society or American society, even Australian society, is trying to lift the literacy of their population so as, in a sense, to civilize the lower classes and bring them into a middle class framework, that Marx appears with his theory of ideology, which is fundamentally different because it is an attempt to look at language in a scientific and objective sense, an attempt to think about texts and their relationship to power. Now this shouldn't be surprising because we have the entire history since ancient times of the theory of rhetoric. And the theory of rhetoric holds that language is itself a tool of power. Rhetoric or oratory was a system of speaking in public which propose to teach students how to speak convincingly so as to gain power, so as to get power for their ideas. So it shouldn't be surprising that there is a relationship, a fundamental relationship between language, texts, literature, poetry, song, and power. So, with Marx, criticism turns away from an interest in the subjective feelings that we have, or subjective responses that we have to a text, towards the function of a text in society. How is a text functioning